I came from France. My family, a lot of them have been in the field of medicine. The closest brother of my father, the youngest one, was a trained radiologist. So I used to hang out in his clinic in the summer. I got interested in computers. When they came along, I got into coding. And then when I decided to go to college, instead of staying in Montpellier, France, at the medical school where a lot of my family went, being maybe a little bit of a rebel, I decided to come to the United States to study electrical engineering. This led me to Hopkins, where I met two of the big leaders in radiology, Bill Brody, who is a radiologist, became the president of Hopkins, and Elias Zerhouni, who was the head of radiology and became the head of the NIH. And with Zerhouni's vision to bring biomedical engineering and radiology to tackle the next generation of imaging, and we were very much focused on magnetic resonance imaging, and the discipline of focus where it was going in from being a technique that was extremely slow and very, very much error prone was cardiac imaging, because it had the challenge of respiratory motion as well as speed. So I helped develop with obviously people at Hopkins and Penn the next generation of cardiac imaging. And I've been at Mount Sinai now 25 years, working in the field of pushing in the next generation of imaging technique and now digital health.
Good. Well, and we'll talk about that next.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So as you can hear from my accent, I'm not from here, but from a very similar country, from Austria. So I feel very at home if you see the landscape here. My background is in computer science and machine learning. I have a PhD in machine learning, but applied to medicine and especially pathology throughout my career. We wrote the first paper on computational pathology 15 years ago. The aim, what we are doing is we try to use AI at scale to influence healthcare positively for the physicians and the patients at the end of the day. And if there's time, we can talk more about how that looks like in pathology. Happy to hear more questions.
So let's talk about that. We can start with AI. We're hearing a lot about how artificial intelligence is going to change medicine, how it may even make doctors irrelevant. Tell us what you see as the short and long-term impacts of AI on, say, a patient's life. And then we'll talk about a doctor's life. How is it going to change medicine?
Yeah. I think what's important to understand first is how AI drastically changed over the last few years, so speaking 5, 6, 7 years. So if you're in that field for a very, very long time, the expression AI is, of course, an old one used in the 60s, 70s, and so forth, used for expert systems that never worked. And these days, what we do is machine learning. So we train algorithms from data. And with the advent of deep learning, so these are very deep neural networks with billions of parameters, you can really capture a lot of the real world. And that changes how AI can be applied at large scale. And that's why we have, for example, now the advent of self-driving cars, and in healthcare, cancer recognition or prediction to response and so forth. So that change from a very obscure statistical discipline for the last 10, 15, 20 years to something that really impacts our lives and our patients' lives is fundamental. And that just is happening now. And if you think about the impact on physicians and patients, I can speak, for example, in pathology. That could be an interesting example. So at a very large scale, so imagine you have some pain in the chest, for example. You go to your radiologist, they see something, you take a biopsy, and then that biopsy, that little piece of tissue, is analyzed by a pathologist under a microscope. And that's done usually still manually. So a pathologist looks through a microscope onto a glass slide. In 95% of hospitals in the US, that's done like that. And that has not changed in 150 years. But the problem is that the diagnosis of the pathologist is the basis of everything that follows afterwards in the medical edifice. It's the basis for the decision of the oncologist how to treat. It's the basis of all clinical trials, all pharmaceutical trials. So if you think of your cancer treatment especially, and a lot of other diseases in addition, it actually depends on the pathologist who looks at your slides and guesses the number of your cancer. And what we try to do in that field is we digitize these slides. So there are scanners now. You end up with very large images with millions of cells on each of these images. So all your holiday shots, for example, would fit on one of these slides. And then we train algorithms to find cancer, grade cancer, and sometimes predict response to treatment. And that has to be done at very large scale. So at Mount Sinai, we are digitizing hundreds of thousands of these slides. We built actually a compute cluster in my lab, the largest supercomputer for pathology in the world. It's in New Jersey. And with that, we can train these very, very large neural networks that can understand morphology of the cancer, so how it grows, how it looks like, very, very well. And that led, after many, many years, in September last year, to the first FDA approval of the first artificial intelligence in pathology. So you hear a lot about AI, and there's a lot of hype, but in practice, there's just one single approved AI in pathology. There are many in radiology because it's more a screening discipline, but in pathology, there's just one because the diagnosis influences everything. And that's today now used for patients in the US, in Europe, in Brazil. And the beauty of AI is it's really a means to democratize also access to health. So not everybody can afford to go to an ivory tower like Mount Sinai, but you can now run that AI somewhere in the rural parts of the country, and patients who would not have access to a subspecialized pathologist now get a readout for their cancer in prostate and breast, for example, they would not get otherwise. And you can also do that, we do that on the philanthropic side, for example, in collaboration with some African countries. Some cases you can mount a cell phone on a microscope, send the image up, and you get a response you wouldn't get. There are some African countries that don't even have a single pathologist. Right? And even in the US, the number of pathologists goes down, the number of cancer cases goes up, the complexity of cases goes up. So just to keep the standard of care in the US, you're going to need AI to support the physicians to do that. So it's very exciting. So that's now where we are now. We can talk about the future later.
Let me just ask you a follow-up, then we'll open it up, and I want to hear from Zahi. You must have done validity studies.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us, are the AI readings ever wrong? Does the pathologist, when you do your validity, say, no, that's not what I see? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so there are two ways to do that. First, in a retrospective way, and you're actually hinting at a very, very important point. So there's a lot of fluff in AI these days. Everybody puts an AI sticker on whatever they do. And if somebody stops by and say, oh, look at that, we have great numbers, you should be always very, very skeptical, right? Is that really true? We evaluate that, for example, on a cohort of 12,700 patients out of 800 institutions out of 45 countries globally. So we proved out that it truly works, regardless if the slides are produced in Italy, in Scandinavia, in Brazil, in South Africa, in all kinds of states of the US. And it shows that the algorithm can really look at them. But that only shows standalone performance of an AI. What the FDA is interested in is how does it impact the decision-making of the physician, right? And that gets to your question. Does the physician change their opinion about the case or not? And there we had 16 pathologists from all over the US, young ones, very experienced ones, subspecialized ones. Some of them read the cases remotely and on site. And over all these cases, the accuracy of the pathologists were improved by 70%. So the error rate was reduced by 70%. So the sensitivity greatly increased. That was for prostate cancer. So if you, for example, have prostate cancer screening with a needle biopsy, these are really tools that help drastically the decision making for these physicians.
Great, 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 great. Zahi, tell us what you're doing and how digital
Yeah,
medicine
yeah.
is changing the way we
I want to
read
tag along
images.
a little bit to
Sure.
what Thomas has said. I mean, AI impact on radiology is incredible. I mean, it's really being disrupted. Pathology is one, radiology and dermatology. And why? Because all these disciplines require what's called pattern recognition. They recognize a certain pattern, disease, no disease. So we also have been lucky in radiology that we have digitized a long time ago. We moved from film to basically computer generated and archival systems. We agreed on the standards of sharing this information and what it should be. So since the 90s, but radiology has been basically in that digital world. So we take advantage very quickly of that data. We at Sinai also have put in an incredible effort to create this data warehouse where we bank all the data that's coming in from our patient. We produce over 1.5 million radiology studies a year at Sinai. We have prospectively and retrospectively taken that data and put it in a data warehouse where the data is, we take the curation from the doctor, where the doctor read the images, they put in some marks on it, and that data is being utilized to train our AI. So we're very data rich in a curated point of view. We do it internally so we don't have issues of obviously security, et cetera. And we've also have been linking, Sinai have been a leader in putting all the other data, such as medical records, lab tests, also into a data warehouse. And now we can link the two together, which means that we can validate these algorithms almost in a real-time kind of fashion without disrupting our clinical care. We do these what we call in silent pilots, and we continue to innovate. We have new algorithms, we collaborate with people, et cetera. What we are now at a point where certain solutions have been useful, and I think the biggest impact today is on the workflow. The patient experience is one. The second one is, as you were saying, how does it affect the radiologist? Radiologists now are spending less time looking maybe at triaging images that's normal. A lot of things we do in radiology, I mean, you're looking normal, abnormal. And you're spending a lot of time on normal stuff, which your computer can do much easier, and then flag the doctor or the radiologist to spend more time on the more difficult cases. That, I think, we're starting to see that impact. After that, obviously, we need to see, can we detect disease that the radiologist was not able to detect? We have cases at Mount Sinai where people looked at mammograms and were able to identify on the mammogram these false negatives, basically, and these false positives. That saves lives. That's such an important big test to do, and that obviously is going to have an impact. The third one, which is not very well appreciated because it really gets into what we call image reconstruction and information theory. We are now changing the way the data is acquired by these instruments. So we take the data, we do image reconstruction. So now instead of reconstructing or taking data at a high resolution, we can take data as a lower resolution and then reconstruct it at a high resolution later using AI. And that has an incredible impact on the time that the patient spends on the table. So a brain MRI, let's say in the past used to take 25 minutes, now a brain MRI takes 5 minutes. I mean, talk about patient experience, but also throughput without losing information. The second part, and when I was talking to here my colleague, we design new imaging equipment. Why is an MRI so expensive? Why is it so bulky? Because it requires instrumentation that needs to be perfect from a magnetic field point of view, that it's extremely homogeneous. The instrument should have very little error in terms of detection. Now we take crappy low magnetic field systems that are heterogeneous. Let's say their hardware specification is bad, but we recover that bad signal with AI. I mean, the phone does that now. I mean, when you take these pictures, I mean, you take a low resolution picture, they reconstruct the higher resolution using AI. So that, I think, is going to change not only the images we get, but also the type of hardware we do. I was telling you're an orthopedic surgeon. I was telling you about some of these new devices that are maybe as big as this chair, portable, can be wheeled around. You don't need to have a specific room to be installed. They're cheap in production. An MRI costs $2 million. These new equipment is in the hundred thousands. That's going to change the way the doctor accesses that and where they access it in terms of rural areas, areas that are underserved, without specifically sacrificing that data, image resolution. So I see an aspect in software that's helping even design new hardware. So that's very exciting for us
That's
in that
incredible.
aspect.
Digital
health?
This is great. Before we ask everybody to talk and ask you a lot of questions, I'd like you both to think about what it'll be like for you in 10 years. How will we change medicine in 10 years? Let's grow from just the images, or from pathology to AI, digital, to the doctor in 10 years.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, for me, I'm an imaging, I was trained as an imaging person, but obviously I have evolved into things that we innovate in and we work on. We're very much interested in what we call multimodal data collection. We want to be able to create for every person that comes to Mount Sinai to create a digital twin from birth to aging through the lifespan. Same thing as people do today with planes. A plane today is equipped with over 30,000 sensors. And everything about this plane, in terms of what it's doing now, the status of the engine, the temperature, how it's landed, what happened to it, is being monitored and being in real time. That computer model of that plane is being updated. Tesla does that too. I mean, they don't reveal how many sensors they have, but I tried to dig a little bit into this, and I think they have a few thousand sensors, not only for the self-driving aspect, but in terms of the status and the maintenance of that car. So what I see us going into the future is really going into what I call from the Internet of Things to the Internet of Body, which means equip people. I mean, I'm wearing all the wearables in the world. I'm wearing Oura Ring, a Whoop, and a Garmin. When I exercise, I put a chest strap. And we at Sinai now are manufacturing these Band-Aids. These Band-Aids are full of electronics, similar to this Band-Aid here. This electronics is extremely powerful. It is not only meant to go as on the wrist. It can be placed on your forehead, can be placed on your chest. It can be placed here to collect all kind of data beyond what you do with these green LEDs. So this is extremely powerful technology because the manufacturing of this became much easier than in the past. You don't need clean rooms to do this like we've done with. We do this now we do it at Sinai now. We recruited a new faculty member from Georgia Tech, which is very well known for this kind of work. And now we do this fabrication, and this is where we see the innovation. And there's a lot more technology that go into this in the future. You can be prototyping things, looking at sweat and with different analytes to monitor inflammatory markers in real time. I think we're going to discover, I mean, these biomarkers, we're very familiar with them at one single time point, but we don't know very well a biomarker in the body that you can monitor over 24 hours. I think it's gonna reveal to us a new data. I'm very interested in nutrition, in the aspect of using, aspect of what kind of food you eat. Is this breakfast good for me or bad for me? We know this from population studies, but we don't know you as a person if you should eat this or not. You should exercise in the morning, exercise in the evening. That exposure of stress that you had, what did it do to your body? So these will be helping us get to that. So my final statement here is that I see us going from analog to fully digital.
Wow.
And maybe, Ken, you will appreciate this, that we will spend more time less on sick care, but more on health care. I'm interested in tweaking human performance so people can live longer, but healthy. And I think we will push the age. I mean, we'll keep pushing it, but now we're going to have a way to really customize that aging as you get older.
And prevention. It'll be incredible.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tom?
What's very unique about Mount Sinai is that what Zahi described for radiology and what I described for pathology are just two examples of how AI can be applied in the healthcare system. So what we try to do at Mount Sinai is really build these success stories in all kinds of areas that include psychiatry, for example, or dermatology, ophthalmology. In all these areas, AI over the next 10 years will play an important role as additional tool for the physician. So the physicians will have a cockpit where all this information comes together about the patient, and all the decision making is done on molecular information, on the morphology, for example, of the cancer and so forth. So the way physicians practice will change drastically over the next years, but it's going to get very, very interesting, much more exciting. So these days, pathologists, for example, if you have a mastectomy, so your breast is removed, you have hundreds of slides you have to go through and look for that needle in the haystack, and that's where the time is lost. AI can help you to find that immediately and then spend your time on better characterizing and defining the best treatment for the patient. And again, the beauty of AI is you can do that then everywhere, at many places, and you can reach out. At Sinai, the vision is to build a fabric of these AI services. So really a fabric of AI, where you have AI in these different areas working together to inform the physician about the patient in all stages, as you said, before they come to the hospital, during the hospitalization, and when they leave. And in addition, it will inform the hospital system how best to optimize processes for the sake of the patient. And so we are in very exciting times. You don't have to go as far as Google CEO and say AI is more important than fire or electricity, but it certainly will be as impactful as the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And the impact on healthcare will be dramatic. And we should try to do whatever we can to make sure that these systems, of course, are effective, safe, and equitable for everyone. To that end, we, for example, initiated also an AI ethics initiative at Mount Sinai to make sure that in all these areas of the AI fabric, it really serves the patient and the patient's privacy and the patient's needs are respected and improved through AI. So these are enormously exciting times, and Mount Sinai is certainly the place to realize that vision.
So let's open it up. Questions? Go ahead, Bob.
Do you two ever coordinate your data sets?
Yeah, of course. I mean, so this is why actually that's why we're moving our effort in AI to the new building with Thomas. And from day one, I mean, we recognize that the data that is coming in, let's say from radiology, is much stronger if it's married to the rest of the data. So we have common interests, and at Sinai we are working, all of us working on this data aspect of multimodal ingestion, and then sharing information, sharing experience to improve what we're doing. Absolutely, it's a common goal, common effort. Yeah.
Go ahead. Anybody?
How has AI in digital health been impactful, and like a specific way that you've used it during the pandemic in your work?
It's for you.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, it has been, was really an opportunity to try to evaluate some of these concepts that we have. So we launched what's called the Warrior Watch. We ended up choosing the Apple Watch to collect certain information on people. We deployed it at Mount Sinai and 1,000 of our healthcare workers to evaluate two things. Can we detect infection, or in this case, COVID, before it's really symptomatic using these 24-hour monitoring? The second one is we understood also, and we appreciate a lot Mount Sinai, the mental health aspect. And we want to evaluate on these patient population. Some of them were in the working, specifically with COVID. Some of them were connected to it. We were all embedded into it. What is the impact of mental health to these physiological models? Can we detect this? So we We demonstrated, we just published a few papers. We have a recent paper on an AI model we have where we can detect an infection, and in this case, we can attribute it potentially to COVID 1 week before somebody is symptomatic. So that's critical, right? In terms of knowing before I'm symptomatic, it may be COVID and could be some other infection. But if you're in the pandemic, you will err on the side of caution and you say, hey, why don't you go get a test, isolate, etc. Then we've also looked at the mental aspect, and we discovered that some of these healthcare workers, some of them, because of the training they had, were more resilient, and we could see on their physiological monitor what does resilient mean compared to the one who basically had that abnormal aspect and mental health. And we deployed a biofeedback technique because we wanted to see if we could change that. So we have something we clip to the ear. It monitors your respiration and your heart rate variability. And with exercises, you can come in sync, which means that you can now, even breathing exercise, right, help you from dealing with stress. So we trained these healthcare workers, and we're just about to look at the data to see if that is reflected in the measurement we have. The second part, we were one of the first group to actually report on COVID data because we got data from China. We had a relationship with the hospitals in China from the previous collaboration looking at actually tuberculosis and using AI. So we were able to get data to Sinai. This is before anybody had access to that, and we started to characterize that on CT and X-ray images. And we devised an algorithm based on few clinical parameters. We wanted to see what is the minimal parameters you can detect, you need clinically, plus the CT images to do AI on detection as good as or better than a radiologist can do for COVID. So this taught us a lot, and it really brought us to what you were saying, that working together and data collection and data harmonization. Yeah.
Good. Yes, please.
You all have a pretty unique perspective on FDA review of AI algorithms. It's something the FDA has struggled with, I think, is thinking about how to regulate AI software with medical device. Is that going to be a big problem for achieving the future? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we started talking to the FDA in 2018, and it took us then 3 years to actually get approval of that first AI in that space. We were lucky to get breakthrough designation for the first AI in oncology that actually got breakthrough designation, and that helped the conversation. So in our case, the FDA was enormously interested. So from the first meeting, they had 15 officers throughout, even too interested because each vertical was interested what we are doing because it was so new and everybody had their ideas. You had to make sure are represented in the final study. So there's the thinking of the FDA, it's very interesting how they, for example, differentiate between radiology and pathology. So in radiology, you have 250 approved AIs these days because they think of it as a screening step. You can always go back and get another X-ray, so it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. While in pathology, as we discussed, the treatment is based on that decision, so it has to be as good or better, as we showed then, in combination with the physician. And so the hurdle is there enormously high. So if we had data from 217 institutions out of 5 countries, all kind of ethnicities, and the FDA really checked against all of them. I do think that's very important, especially in a space where there is so much hype and so much fluff and overselling and really a lot of people, of course, who sell snake oil, that it makes sense to have a regulatory step for healthcare that truly proves safety and efficacy of these algorithms. But that hurdle is high. Right? And what we try to do at Mount Sinai is take these learnings and carry it in all these other disciplines to really move faster, to end up with that array of AI tools that help the patients and that fabric of AI at Mount Sinai.
And learning algorithms, is there a future there? And is that going to be too big of a challenge for FDA?
So currently these are fixed deterministic systems, right? So you don't have online learning or continuous learning in these systems. In healthcare, you actually do not want that, right? Imagine you have that beautiful AI, and then you have a physician, and that doesn't have to be malicious. Let's say a very young one, ambitious one, and then the AI completely adapts to that single person. So you have a complete drift, and then you can't guarantee performance gains. What you can do with the FDA, you can actually update your system like all other software in versions, so let's say once per year or so, as long as you can guarantee that on the test sets that are defined by the FDA, you can guarantee the performance which is actually indicated with the device. So I think that's a good system. It has to be streamlined so we can go faster.
Go ahead.
A slightly provocative question, just slightly. I love the idea of digital twin. I mean, I work for crowd management, so for me that's just like music to my ears, or Bach, even more better. But where I was going with it is, when I think of medicine, traditionally how we look at it, it's like pathology. All the different groups are like separately defined, right? Groups of medicines for every organ in your body, right? If I think of it as like a digital twin, I almost feel like you've got to turn the whole model on its head and think of it as one holistic system, and then start thinking about all the different components of it. Like, I'm curious to hear about your ideas on, is that happening? Do you see that happening?
I think at Mount Sinai, our best doctors are the ones that are doing that kind of integration, and we see that. So obviously, you of course, you're talking about the silo aspect. We were talking about it also today, but I can assure you, I'm not a physician, but all my colleagues are, and I work with them, and I know that when they take care of a patient, they are looking at the whole aspect together and communicating with each other to make sure that that patient is being looked at as a whole single system and being taken care of the areas that need help. So that's why I think technology is going to even help further, because now this information will be available to all the specialists. It's not like one person is going to get a specialized view compared to the other. So that information is going to be transparent. That model of that subject or patient is going to be available in a digital manner, and the results and the model will be updated in real time as you have an encounter with that subject. That's why at Mount Sinai, again, we are very much into that data collection and making sure that that data is being utilized in that aspect. Yeah. That plane, believe me, that plane with these sensors, I mean, they have been able to reduce the maintenance, obviously, to prevent these accidents, etc. Not because you have better pilots, I think because you have all these sensors and all this technology and that digital twin that's available. In industry, they're using the same thing. I mean, our MRI system gets the maintenance it gets, and the frequency and the lifetime of that system is much different than it was 20 years ago, etc., where the maintenance was more, without looking at it in real time over time. So we have to transfer that to our delivery of care, definitely.
To you, because I know a little bit about Teslas, and I know
How many sensors?
I mean, to the point that they even know when your wipers need replacement. And so they've got like one central engine that's controlling every aspect of it. And I love what you said about Internet of Humans or bodies, because I feel like, should I be eating these potatoes?
Well, we can talk a lot about this too, yeah.
Let me ask, it's an interesting thing because we talk big data, right? There's so much information. How do we get the physicians? Because if you think about who your true stakeholder is, the patient, we just want to get well as a patient. And we don't understand all the stuff that goes on back here. But your physician is basically your true stakeholder and your user. So understanding the user stories of the physicians and how they, because you said it, all the fluff that's inside, because AI, people have all of these ideas about what it is and actually they're not clear about what it's not. Mm-hmm. But the key is this alignment and intersection of human thinking and insight with the technology. How are you making sure that those are holding together?
So that's the biggest challenge we have, right? But it's not an insurmountable challenge. So I mean, I'll let Thomas also talk more about this, but I draw on from my own experience. You know, I adopted this device. This is a Whoop device. This device is not a watch. There's no panel in here, and it collects the information, and at the end of every morning, it gives you a dashboard of a couple of things. What was your strain the day before or the week, over the week? What was your sleep pattern? And what is your recovery score? They use that information. So they're not telling me, I mean, I can get the detail if I scroll down more, but they're presenting me that actionable information in how am I today? How much physical strain, because it's geared into that, I'm able to absorb that day. They looked at heart rate variability. They looked at my SpO2. It looked at my resting heart rate. It looked at my temperature. But it is presenting that data. So you can imagine creating this algorithm to present it to the orthopedic surgeon. Not everything down that chart, but show that few parameters, right, in the dashboard. There's still more to be done there. We need to, I mean, people in the athletic high performance, human performance aspect, they've done that. And we need to translate that knowledge and that understanding to now the healthcare aspect.
I think this is a great question, because what you hear from so many physicians is the EMR overwhelms them.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, I don't have enough time for this.
Exactly.
And if we can't make it simple and useful,
Yeah.
it's not going to go anywhere.
No. We dealt with it. I mean, cardiac MRI was my first thing I got into, and we moved from this generation 1 to generation 2. The problem with cardiac MRI at the end, and the problem in MRI in general, is such a great system, but it's so overwhelming to so many knobs to turn. So we went through this evolution of now presenting with AI. I mean, with Doran's work, and you worked with him at Princeton, at Siemens, much more simplified from the aspect of the way the data is acquired and what you need to basically tinker with. The tinkering is done in the background, and that's how what we need to do. Yeah. Thomas, do you want to say more about this AI algorithm? Obviously, because it's all part of that analytics, right? I mean,
of course, as you know, we spend enormous times on educating physicians, making things simple for physicians, explaining things, making sure they are not afraid to be replaced. But the world is changing, right?
Yes.
And a pathologist with AI will be better than a pathologist without, right? And there is some onus also on the physician, right? If they swore the Hippocratic Oath, they have to choose the tools that help them to treat patients best, right? And that's what's great about Sinai, is that from the top there is that spirit of innovation that goes down. But there are a lot of institutions where some physicians are more interested in the status quo and the paycheck, and don't rock my boat. I don't want to do anything I did in the last 30 years. And that's where, of course, leadership is enormously important to change that culture, because the world will change. And then the competition between healthcare systems, the systems with AI, will clearly outperform the systems without, not only in commercial terms, but especially in outcome, right, for patients. And so it's a collaboration. It's work for everyone.
We're not working in a vacuum. I mean, we're not engineers sitting in that dark room and coming up with stuff. We are iterating and talking to all our colleagues that are so receptive to get their feedback. It should be like this. I don't want to get that information. It's too much. I mean, give me this, give me that less frequently. Let's create that. So we are always iterating, and that's the beauty of it. We were working with to improve that concept and to push it out of the door. A lot of work done in the clinical data science group with David Rich at the hospital. They have a whole team just there to prototype these algorithms. They came up with the nutrition, right? The nutrition algorithm, the falling, right?
This may sound too self-serving.
Yeah.
So let me tell you why it really is somewhat unique. We're a hospital that gave birth to a medical school. And the history of most medical schools is that there's a university that had a medical school, and then they tried to find a hospital to affiliate with. And it's never one governance structure. So you have two governance structures with, two different groups who actually sometimes have very different interests. In our case, because a hospital gave birth to a medical school, we also focused on disease. It was all about patients. When a university has a medical school, there are lots of things that those people in the medical school can do that have to do with nothing with disease, but with interesting things that are going on in the university. And that's fine. I mean, that may pay off 30, 40 years from now. But our people are integrated, and they are all about disease and pathology and pathophysiology and therapeutics. You don't come to Mount Sinai if you don't understand that those are the things that are important. So when Zahi talks about this, it may sound, oh my God, that's so self-serving. That's so, no, that's the people who are there. That's the values of the institution. That's what happens when a hospital gives birth to a medical school, and we don't have the centrifugal force of the university that's pushing us away. We don't have a different governance structure that's saying something like, the university can't afford this, or the hospital says, we're losing so much money, don't tell us what we're going to do with the medical school. We figure out a way to make it all work together and, focus on patients and disease. So many of you have a 9 o'clock to go to, and it's a few minutes to 9. I want to thank this hardcore group for showing up, because if you hadn't, we'd just be talking to Mount Sinai people today. And we do enough of that. So thank you for coming. A few of us will stay behind if you have other questions. And enjoy the rest of the day and this beautiful place. Thank you.
Thank you.